Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Bruin Political Union podcast. I'm your host, Mia Thorsen.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shannon Courtney, and I'm the BPU podcast director.
So we want to welcome you to our 7th episode of our Bruin Political Union podcast. It's titled Biden's 100 Days in Office, the Promises and the Letdowns. And also, Shannon and I wanted to tell you that this is our last podcast of the academic year. And no guests today, so it's just me and Shannon, old school style, those of you who were here from the beginning. Okay, so in this episode, we will be discussing Biden's first 100 days in the White House office, and if he followed through on some of his promised platforms and policies regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and vaccine distribution, voting rights, climate change, and lastly, immigration and DACA concerning family separation at the border.
So first, I'm going to be discussing in regards to Biden's promises and if they've been kept in regards to COVID-19. So some background information on this. Days after becoming the president, Biden announced that he would be having a team of advisors spearhead his pandemic response once he takes into office. And Biden also promised to begin working on a new coronavirus aid package before officially taking office and collaborating with state and federal representatives to get this passed throughout the Congress. In regards to releasing a vaccine distribution plan, Biden said that his plan would spend $25 billion on vaccine production and distribution, and calls for vaccines to be free for all Americans. And he also wanted to mend U.S. relations with the World Health Organization, or WHO, and rejoin the body which Trump pulled out of during the very beginning of the pandemic. And so some of the outcomes in regards to the pandemic, Biden initiated a COVID-19 task force that completes briefings 3 times a week in regards to an emphasis on equity with vaccine distribution. He signed a $1.9 trillion relief bill that passed along party lines in the Congress, and it contained money for direct payments, enhanced unemployment benefits, and rental assistance, but did not include everything Biden wanted to cover, such as the $15 minimum wage that was being pushed by many Democrats within the House of Representatives. In regards to the vaccine distribution, over 40% of the population in the United States has at least one dose of the vaccine, and 27% are fully vaccinated. And Biden announced that the U.S. would be rejoining WHO during the early beginning of Biden's term in office as president. In regards to climate change, one of his longstanding campaign promises, Biden planned to re-enter the U.S. immediately into the Paris Climate Agreement that Trump removed the U.S. from the very beginning of 2017. And Biden also wanted to organize a Climate World Summit to assist nations with high carbon emissions to take action against climate change. And he also wanted to set environmental goals through a proposed clean energy plan, which included getting the country to net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and a $2 trillion climate plan. Some of the outcomes in regards to the environment and climate change, Biden held a virtual international climate summit on April 22nd, urging countries to follow the United States' lead in reducing their contributions on global warming. In regards to making the U.S. an international leader on tackling climate change, this is one of Biden's challenging promises, because, for example, with Trump's departure from the Paris Climate Accord, the rest of the world sees U.S.'s the dropping in and dropping out consistently in international climate agreements as wary in regards to the U.S. being an actual international leader. And there's also a lot of pushback among partisan lines regarding a potential $2 trillion climate plan, because obviously the amount of money in that plan. In regards to racial equity, before the election, Biden pushed for the passage of laws to strengthen the Voting Rights Act, since legislation to do so passed the House of Representatives in 2020, but did not pass in the Senate. In regards to the outcome of this, a comprehensive voting bill passed the House, but Republicans universally opposed it, leaving its fate to the Senate, which is unlikely to be passed, especially due to the filibuster, which is obviously being debated right now in politics, whether the United States should be keeping the political tactic of the filibuster. The Joe Biden White House announced that it was dropping or shelving its national political policy oversight commission bill regarding police reform that would prohibit certain police practices such as chokeholds, because quote, "It would not be the most effective way to deliver on to our top priority of this area, which is to sign the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act into law." So they are more focused on the George Floyd Act in comparison to the National Police Oversight Commission.
Thank you so much, Shannon. And speaking of George Floyd, we just recently passed the 1 year anniversary of his murder. So, quick moment of silence for Mr. Floyd. Okay, and in terms of immigration, so within and immigration, as we all know, was a very contentious topic starting in 2016 with the Trump administration and has been circulating mass media since. Within the first 100 days of his administration, Biden said that we should start reforming the US asylum system and the treatment of people at the border with Mexico, specifically calling for a stop to the Trump administration's migrant protection protocols of quote unquote children in cages. And children in cages, specifically the use of that rhetoric, received so much media attention within the last couple of years. And for those of you who don't know, what asylum is when you are an immigrant to the United States. You can be granted asylum for certain things. So if there's genuine threat to your life in your country, if there was a natural disaster in your country, you can be granted asylum in the United States, which is essentially a protection. So Biden also pledged to remove funding toward the construction of a Mexico-American border wall, but would keep the already built wall up. So no more cries of hashtag build the wall in the White House since Biden has moved in. And on day one as president, Biden said he would pass an executive order focused on reuniting children and parents separated at the border. He also pledged to make DACA permanent on his first day in office. And DACA information, I understand, is extremely pertinent, especially at UCLA. We are a Hispanic serving institution, and not just for Hispanic immigrants, of course, although those are generally the dreamers. So if that's pertinent to you, please, we will link some resources with this podcast. And the outcome of this, Biden introduced legislation that would give a pathway to citizenship for immigrants in the US legally, and especially children. But the prospects for a comprehensive immigration bill passing Congress are small due to the strong Republican opposition, similar to what Shannon was mentioning earlier. Biden signed an executive order on his first day in office that strengthened DACA, but the program remains under threat. For example, a federal judge in Texas, who previously indicated that he thought DACA was unlawful, is expected to rule on the legality of the program soon. Joe Biden signed an executive order on February 2nd to create a task force to help identify children separated from their parents and reunite the families. However, a court document posted in April revealed that the parents of 445 children remained missing. There has been an increase in unaccompanied minors coming across the border, and families are still separating on the Mexico side of the border. The count of unaccompanied minors peaked in March at nearly 6,000 children crossing the border unaccompanied. And for those of you who might be ill-informed on the actual process of crossing the border, oftentimes it is very costly in more ways than just monetarily or fiscally. It's an extremely arduous and difficult process that would take a physical toll on a physically fit grown man. So for these children to be crossing the border unaccompanied is a human rights crisis. The president issued a proclamation revoking Trump's emergency declaration that had helped fund the construction of the border wall. Okay. Shannon, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, in regards to then like the children that are crossing the Mexican American border unaccompanied, doing a lot of research on this and like seeing the historical accounts of these and the personal accounts of these children on different news platforms, on whether it be YouTube or general traditional media sites. A lot of these children are crossing the border through really dangerous methods such as coyotes, of like having to pay these coyotes up to like $300 to $1,000 or more to cross the border, which these children don't know if throughout this journey if the money is going to be self-sufficient or they're going to be trafficked into human trafficking, organ trafficking, or like even gang violence and death in that regard. So it's really important, especially going forward with the promises Biden made of previously under Trump's administration reuniting those children, but now that more parents are sending their children to the border for hopes of better lives, but they can be under threat, to make sure that the Biden administration also looks out for these children and potentially uh, uniting them with their families. And also with this, we've seen some, even though, for example, under Trump, the rhetoric around the institutions that were keeping these children were like, children locked in cages. There has been pushback with the Biden administration in regards to the facilities. Are they actually being better? Are they being treated more humanitarily, especially with the rise of COVID and the increased amounts of COVID cases within the institutions? So it's really important that we keep, regardless of Republican or Democrat, we keep these politicians accountable for the influx of immigration and protecting children, especially, and also in other regards, with the climate change, with COVID-19, the pandemic, with climate change and racial equity and equality happening, all these movements happening in the United States and internationally right now.
Yeah, absolutely, Shannon. And it's almost crazy to me that we're already in 100 days. We're 100 days into the Biden administration, because November feels like yesterday. These last 6-7 months have been one long day, in my opinion. But absolutely, what Shannon is saying is super relevant. No matter what side you are on, accountability needs to be a common theme in terms of how we approach our political figures. And another thing I want our audience to be really conscious of is rhetoric in the media that you consume. So just because it doesn't say kids in cages, it's still a detention center, a detainment center. And do your own research and be very mindful of what you read and what you consume and how you consume it.
Exactly, and also to note, we kind of went full circle with this last episode of the podcast for the academic year. We first started out with our first episode with me and I about the international perception of the United States abroad, and we talked a lot about the promises that Trump made and whether he fulfilled them, and the perception the international political system had in regards to the Trump administration, but also what Biden planned to promise and how the international community was going to respond to that. And so we kind of went full circle with all these different talking points, especially with during that time it was still kind of uncertain whether the United States would have efficient vaccine distribution, where wherever we would be vaccinated, and climate change and immigration. So it's very interesting to see the development of the United States, and hopefully striving for more dialogue between Republicans and Democrats, and actually getting policy done and not being in the gridlock all the time.
Yeah, I love what Shannon said about us coming full circle, because that is exactly how it feels. And thank you guys so much for following us along on our first year of the Bruin Political Union podcast, on our journey. As a freshman who has been only at UCLA online, and Shannon, I think this is your first year at UCLA, and you've been all online too. Yeah. Being able to experience what was a tumultuous and unprecedented year politically, socially, epidemically, I don't know if that's a word, but it is now, has been really interesting, to say the least. And having a cute little community that is the Bruin Political Union, everybody join, has been really wonderful and really refreshing to have a discourse, to talk to people, especially the very educated and very fun group of people that is the Bruin Political Union. So now I'm going to get into our last conclusion of the school year, my last thank you. We might be hanging around a little bit this summer, right, Shannon? But
Yeah.
I'll give them a brief goodbye. So thank you, everybody, for those of you who have tuned in from the beginning, those of you who this is your first episode. Thank you so much. I have said it many times before, but I'll say it again to Shannon, the director. She is super woman, you guys. I can't wait to see her on Capitol Hill. This is really her brainchild. I am just the smooth talker. So if that, again, thank you all so much for joining us. Short episode today, but short and sweet,
Yeah.
just how we like it.
And I want to thank Mia for being such a great host throughout this time, really engaging with our guests and our audience. It was really great to have that type of dynamic and always like being an active participant within the conversations and giving back to the guests what they were discussing to like actually create dialogue about critical political issues that were going on and also social issues in the United States and internationally. And so I also want to say to our audience, if you have any suggestions regarding video ideas, what information you'd like to see, or what guests to invite next to the podcast, as Mia said, we might be doing a little bit in summer, but primarily next fall, you will see us all together because we'll be on campus. You can contact the Bruin Political Union at bpu@g.ucla.edu. And also, if you're interested or you actually like the conversations that we have in the Bruin Political Union, we're also going to be hosting recruitment during the fall. So if you'd like to join the team, it could be the podcast team or whatever other team we have that you would like to join. If we have different options and different skills that we focus on, more than welcome to check us out at the Bruin Political Union.
Absolutely. And just one more thank you before we say goodbye. And I want to thank all of our guests who have come on. You are so much more interesting than I am. So thank you for coming on and sharing with us your experiences, your knowledge, enlightening us and our viewers. We wouldn't be a podcast show without you. And I would also like to thank Raisa, who is me and Shannon's, I guess, boss. She is the coolest boss. And again, join BPU in the fall and come talk to us. We're fun.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone.